having parental units that raise you in faith is nothing that you can ever take for granted. It's a grounding point.
Do you think that the modern church is raising up creative people well?
First off, he was like, I need somebody to help manage all of this who knows what they're doing. And here I arrived with my job description, like, wow, this is what I'm supposed to do. He hired me in 24 hours. 6 years after that, called my mom. I was like, hey, I'm supposed to move to Louisiana. And she was like, I know.
Can we talk about the album? Thanks for watching At Harry's. I am Harrison Fredericks. Today I'm joined by an exciting guest, Derrick Millard II. He is a creative pastor at Lift City Church. He is also just a performing arts teacher, all-around creative genius. Thank you for spending the morning with me.
I feel honored. You bigged me up just then. I like all-around creative genius. That was nice. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's how people know you in this community. Is you bring visions to life. You have so much positivity and energy. That's kind of what I've seen about you online and just some of your work so far.
Thank you. Yeah. I'm excited that's paid off in my life. You know, I've always been an excited, energetic person. So thank my parents for allowing it to live on and not die in me.
Speaking of your parents, what was your family dynamic like growing up?
Oh yeah, that's awesome. So my dad was a military guy. So when I first grew up, he was there a lot, but because as much military as he was really active in our lives. Like, don't get me wrong, but he was military, so he was kind of like hardcore. And my mom is a pastor. She's been a minister and a spiritual leader my entire life. And so the dynamic of that has always been really great because I've had two awesome parents that have been in my life consistently. They've sacrificed so much for us. They've spoiled us in some ways. And so they've been a part of our lives for a long time in a very special way. And I say that because I count that as a blessing. Not everybody gets that as an opportunity. You know, some people take that for granted to have two parents involved in your life, working parents who love God, who love ministry, who raise you in that lifestyle is really a blessing when you get it, because I felt like I was really sheltered not like they kept me from things, but I didn't understand that other people in the world didn't get to experience this type of family structure. I was so used to that being the case that it was like getting out in the world and be like, oh, wow, everybody doesn't have the parents that I have. That's different. So I count it as a blessing in that way.
I'm really curious about your experience with that because I 100% relate to what you're saying. My parents have been married for almost 40 years now.
Yeah.
I grew up in the church because of their faith. And when I got to college, I was starting to meet a ton of people who did not have that.
Yeah.
Like, had terrible family dynamic, horribly broken family trees. Yeah. What can you say about your experience in that family dynamic?
Well, I say two things. I think the first thing that comes to my mind is having parental units that raise you in faith is nothing that you can ever take for granted. It's a grounding point. And when I say a grounding point, we who grew up in Christian or faith-based homes don't understand how much of our lives were built around the knowledge of God and the understanding of who God is and that foundation being put in our lives. So it gives you a center no matter what else you do. And I like you mentioned going to college. I think about when I went to college, you know, people were wilding. And then I also had years where I was like out there just having a good time and wilding and doing. And they always say, once you're raised in it, this is why they say train up a child in the way you can go. It's like, once you're raised in it, there's always that little voice in the back of your head that's like, yeah, I mean, you're out here and you're doing whatever you want to do, but God has a purpose for you. God has a plan for you. There's something bigger that you should be doing. So we can't ever take for granted that we've had the opportunity to have that foundation laid. Because when you go other places and see and experience other things, that will always exist. It won't go away. It will always be this voice of God that's like, hey, there's a purpose, there's a plan, there's something that you should be doing, there's a way that you should carry yourself, there's a way that you should behave. And then when I got to college, I always laugh and say, I feel like when I got to college, I was introduced to one, the thing we just talked about, just freedom in terms of family structure. But the other thing that I was introduced to was like things like racism or classism or the ways people's dynamics versus people who had money and versus poor. Because I grew up in Prince George's County, which is Maryland, which is the most affluent African American county in America. So I grew up being used to seeing a lot of wealthy African American people. That was not like a strange thing for me. Then I left and I went to college. I went to college at Temple University in Philadelphia, which is where I got my creative degrees. And I was introduced to a different world in Philly. Like I love Philly, but I lived in the hood in Philadelphia. The Temple University, if anybody knows where that school is, it's literally planted in the middle of the hood. And so my apartment, when at first I was in the dorm, but then when I moved off campus into off-campus apartments, I was living around people who did not at all grow up in the way that I grew up. And I realized how much people needed people who had a strong foundation to help tell them that they could come out of things and they could be better in life. And that life didn't have to look the way that they've seen it all of their lives, because I'm just so used to just, oh, I see all these wealthy, happy, wonderful people for most of my life. Not that everything was perfect. Obviously there was issues, but I felt like I didn't really know what the world looked like for everybody else until I went to college. And then I was like, oh, this is like the real world out here. And you're an adult now. So yeah, I again, thank God for my parents for that and being able to stabilize in it. The other thing that comes to my mind is having parents that are willing to allow you to grow and express yourself. That's probably the other thing about my childhood. I was a wild child in the sense that I have a lot of energy now. Just imagine all that energy when I was a kid, just all over the place. And my parents always tell the story of the doctors meeting with me because I would go to school and I would just, yeah. But the problem is I had straight A's. So like teachers couldn't do much about it because I would be talking all the time, but my grades were like top tier. So really what was happening is I would finish all the assignments early and then I'd be like, I got nothing else to do. So I got to talk to people. And they'd be like, yeah, you got to be quiet. I'm like, well, what am I supposed to do? I've finished all the work. I need to talk. And so they took me to the doctor. And I remember the doctors were like, they wanted to put me on a bunch of medication. They were like, okay, he needs to be, ADHD, all that other stuff, which nothing is wrong with people who are on medication for those things. But they wanted to put me on that medication. And my parents took me to one of the associate pastors of our church, talked with him. And then he ended up meeting with my parents. And he said, how were you when you were younger? And my dad described, he was like, were you energetic when you were younger? And they were like, yeah, something like that. They were like, yeah, he's a little bit more energetic than everybody else. But I would submit that in some way, God is going to use this energy that he has. And I think you need to be careful not to do everything in your power to stifle the amount of energy that he has and to cultivate it and teach him how to use the amount of energy that he has in the right way. And so they decided for that reason to not put me on any medication. And now I look at my life and like you said, I will plan the event. I'll sing at the event. I'll sweep the floors. I'll instruct all the people on what to do. I'll do the wardrobe. I'll do the flyers and design all the graphics if I feel like it. Thank God for Canva. When I want to hit it real quick, I'll design all the graphics. I'll record it. I'll close it up. I'll clean up after it's over. And people are looking like, how are you still doing all that stuff? Because my energy is still like on 10,000. And it's because my parents gave me the opportunity to be all of who I was called to be. And they didn't try to stifle that.
How do you take that creative energy, that enthusiasm to make something? It sounds like you have so many thoughts and so many ideas going on in your head that you have to try and make sense of it. You have to try and create a vision for it. How do you take all of that enthusiasm and spontaneity and try and find a path for it?
Practically, I write a lot. I journal a lot. I have to get thoughts out of my head. So every day I'm a brain dump. I brain dump daily. I get my pads out and I say, okay, what is all the things that are on my mind? And I will write down if it's ideas or if it's, I got to take care of this, or I have categories in my pad because I'm responsible for a lot of different areas. So I have like, this is my personal category. This is the church stuff that I have to do. This is the stuff that I have to do for my creative business. This is the stuff I have to do for the school that I teach at. And I have like my organized list of this is what I want to do in each one of these areas. And then I might have the same thing for the creative ideas. Here's the creative ideas that I have in each area. And then I try to pray and prioritize. That would probably be the biggest thing. Prayer and prioritization. Okay, God, I need you to tell me what I'm supposed to be focused on right now, because I have the ability to be focused on 20 things. But as excitable and energetic as I am, I want to give the best of myself to all of those things. So God, I need you to tell me, what do you want me to focus on now? And what do you want me to just table for later? And then how do I prioritize that? What is the most important thing? Like now I have a 7-month-old daughter that's new in my life since February of this year. And so that priority just shot up. It's like, okay, this is a priority now. Everything else has to come secondary to making sure that her and my wife are good. And so being able to pray and prioritize things in that way is how I kind of keep myself organized.
How are things going as being a father?
Oh, it's exciting. So I just put up a status on Facebook. It's exciting, but I am because I know how wild I can be, I try to be a very regimented, organized person, particularly when it comes to timeliness and things, because I have so many different commitments. And this child has completely thrown this out of the window. So I literally just put on Facebook, it's like, I hate lateness. I despise lateness. I'm just built like that. I hate being late. I hate other people being late. I just feel like if we're on time, let's just hit it to the best of our ability. I understand things happen, but I want to be on time to the best of our ability. And then this beautiful baby girl came and she runs our house. So it's been a mental adjustment to be like, okay, we got to get her together before we can get out the house. And getting her together is really on her timing, because she might not want to lay down on this changing pad right now. She just might want to scream and cry for a couple seconds. You got to give her a moment. So that's been the biggest adjustment, is realizing I have far less control over my life than I did before. And that's been an adjustment.
Let's talk about being the creative pastor at Lift City Church. I don't know of too many churches that have that specific of a role. Yeah. Can you walk me through what exactly that means? And also just how are you leveraging your skills in that role?
So that is a little bit of a longer story based off of how you asked the question, because it's interesting that you said that there's not a lot of churches in that role. I'm a creative pastor of Lift City Church now, was the creative director. And before this, I was the creative director of our parent church. So our church, Lift City Church, came out of a parent church in the DC area called Spirit of Faith Christian Center. And Spirit of Faith Christian Center, weekly basis, sits anywhere between 5,000 to 6,000 people every week, every Sunday. The full membership rally of that church was about 14,000 people. And before I came down here and joined my parents in ministry and became the creative pastor of this church, I was up there being the creative director of our parent church. And I was a creative director there for 6 years. And it's funny because I got that position. I was living in Philadelphia. I graduated with a theater degree. And I was living in Philadelphia doing theater, doing shows, working. And God told me, okay, you're doing good, fresh out of college, taking care of bills, but really struggling in some way. And God was really like, okay, you got to prepare yourself for your next season of life. So I was like, what does that mean? He was like, you need to move back home to DC. So I was in the Philadelphia area, but I grew up in the Maryland area, like I told you. So he was like, you need to move back home. And I was like, okay, I'll move back. So I moved back home, and I, of all places, took a job at an IT place for Geico. It was an IT department for Geico. And it was one of the most miserable jobs of my entire life.
That sounds like a nightmare for any creative person.
It was a nightmare. My job at Geico IT was to take old computers that Geico employees worked on, take them, open them, take out a CD that wiped their computer clean, put the CD in, let the CD wipe the computer clean of the system, take the CD out, close the computer, mark it as wiped, put it to the side, grab the next computer. All day long.
Not much creativity there.
All day long, wiping computers. Every now and then I would get to go up and walk around the building and help fix a computer, which none of that was what I was interested in. And so I didn't know why I was there, but I was making great money. So I didn't know why I was there mentally, emotionally, physically, and financially. I was like, okay, I'm stacking bread. I don't know what's supposed to happen next. So I worked there about a year. I ended up leaving there because the guy was like, okay, done. You can leave now. So I ended up leaving the job. And for about 38 days or so when I left that job, I was driving Uber because I didn't know what I wanted to do next. So I was like, okay, I got an Uber to pay the bills. So I started driving Uber. On the drive of Uber, promise you, I'm riding one day, and over that 48 days, I had been like praying, okay, God, 38 days, God, what am I supposed to be doing next? And out of nowhere, the term creative pastor came to my mind. I promise you, I have never heard the term before. And at this time, this was about 2015, 2016, and the term came to my head. I had had friends who had told me that I was going to be creative and that God, I always knew that at one point I was going to be a pastor, but I had never heard the term creative pastor. So literally that night I Googled it, and the only church that was having it at the time was Elevation. And everybody knows Elevation now, but back then that was when Elevation was first starting to come up. And I was like, they had an entire job description listed online for what was called a creative pastor. And the job description was, the job of the creative pastor is to ensure the vision of the church is received, to empower consistent execution in the production departments, to encouragingly challenge the status quo, and to equip the creative community. And when I saw that, I was like, this is what I do in life. I equip creatives to do X. I love challenging the status quo. I'm there to help people do things excellently. That has all been a part of my brain. So I wrote a job description that night and was like, this is what I want to do. And I went to the pastor of my home church and I was like, this is what I scheduled a meeting with him. Actually, correction. I told my mother that I needed to meet with him. The very next day, my mother calls me and says, Pastor Mike, who's our pastor, has asked to speak with you. So I said, oh, you told him I wanted to meet with him. She said, no, I didn't. His assistant called me this morning and said, I need to get a hold of Derrick. And I said, you're lying because I just told you last night that I need to meet with him. She was like, I promise you, the next day, he has sent his assistant to call and ask, can you schedule a meeting with him? I go into the meeting and I go in with the job description. He doesn't know that's what I'm going in with. I hand the job description. I'm like, hey, I'm supposed to be a creative. At that time, I wasn't a pastor. I was like, I'm supposed to be a creative director here for this church. And he was like, what is that? And I explained it to him. And he was like, Dee Dee. He called his wife into the room. And his wife came in and he was like, what did I tell you I needed last night, to his wife? And she was like, someone to help you organize like the creative parts of this church because that was back when every church was starting to realize what churches like Elevation were doing. And so then we were just starting to tip into the new age of production. And so he was like, I need somebody to help manage all of this who knows what they're doing. And here I arrived with my job description. Like, wow, this is what I'm supposed to do. He hired me in 24 hours and was like, hey, you're going to work. And from that point on, for the next 6 years, I became the creative. And my job was to pull all the departments together and to make sure we were telling one creative story, one understood line. Like he was teaching on faith. What are we doing for faith in the youth department? What are we doing for faith on our videos? What are we doing for faith in our graphics? What are we doing for our faith in our staging? What are we doing for faith in the sanctuary? Are we doing prop-ups or like all that stuff? And so then worked there for 6 years. And then through working there, I knew God told me, okay, you're supposed to move down to Louisiana and help your parents do the same thing. And so 6 years after that, called my mom. I was like, hey, I'm supposed to move to Louisiana. And she was like, I know. Because she had known for years that I was supposed to come here and live here. And I had for years told her, absolutely not. I'm not moving to Louisiana. I like the city. I want to live in New York or something. But then God was like, nope, you're going. And so me and my wife moved back here. And for the last 4 years, that's what I do for my church. Aside from being over the worship arts department, I help organize everything creatively and just, it's really turned into like an executive pastor role, just in terms of making sure organizationally our church runs the way it needs to run, and we create the best culture for our ministry.
That's a really incredible story to hear, just how you had all these things that you knew were inside of you as a calling from God, and then to be able to find a way to solve a problem doing that. I want to talk a little bit more about this whole concept of creativity and the church, because kind of the reason I asked you that question, a lot of churches, especially at the small local level, odds are they're not going to have a creative pastor. They're not even probably really thinking about social media or influence or creativity, things like that. They're probably focused on just making sure the church can stand on its 2 feet.
Right.
So I want to talk a little bit more about what are your thoughts on creativity in the church? Do you think that the modern church is raising up creative people well?
My first thought is I think we have to redefine what we say as creative people. First off, I am a firm believer that everybody is a creative. I say that because the Bible says that we are made in the image and likeness of God. And God is the ultimate creator. That's what all he did. So now we get down into the question of, well, what are you creating? Because if I create a spreadsheet, I'm still creating something. If I create a plan to do X for X department, I'm still creating something. So I think first off for me, it's understanding that we are all tasked. Everyone in the church is tasked with using our creative brain to do something. And how, as a pastoral leader, am I helping to equip somebody to use their brain creatively? For me, that's thinking outside the box, not saying no when the answer could be yes. Because sometimes we say no too easily. It's like, oh, can you do this? No, I don't know how. Can we figure it out? Can I do the research? Google is a powerful tool. We don't honor it enough. And now we got chat GPTs and all this other stuff that can easily tell you what you need to do to create X. I can go to a department and say, what is out there for a church of my size to be able to do X? And I feel like as pastoral creative leaders at the church at large, we don't utilize that enough. I think because we see what we see on social media, we think that the answer is going outside of our local body and trying to spend thousands of dollars to hire somebody to come in and do something creatively. When really, my question is, are you training the creative people in your own congregation? Because everybody in your congregation is creative in some way. Have you identified what they are called to create? And have you focused on how you could help build what they are called to create? The answer is not to throw money at it. That's one of my most annoying things is when smaller churches spend 20, 30, however many thousands of dollars that you've saved up to get an audio board and a light system that nobody in your church really knows how to use. That's a waste of time and resources to put all that money because you think the answer is I just got to throw money at it, as opposed to the answer of how can I train this teenager that's in my church who might have a small interest in audio. What videos can I find for them to watch? What program can I send them to that will teach them a little bit more about how doing audio, which will then benefit our ministry, but will grow them as an individual. I feel like that's a big part of my music artistry. Back in the day, the way musicians were trained is you got on that keyboard and that piano with the other musicians that were older than you, and you sat there and you worked at it. And you prayed for the day that they would let you on the keyboard because you just, hey, I just want a chance. And when you got on the keyboard and you did it wrong, they said, hey, that was trash. You got to fix that. That wasn't good. And you kept working at it and you kept working at it. And so we raised up these musical creatives within our churches to be able to carry the legacy and then hand that down to the next person. And I feel like we don't do that as much these days across the board creatively because we think that the answer is find the fanciest, shiniest thing and pay for it. Or the answer is I don't have money to take care of it. Like you were saying, because I'm a smaller church, I don't have the money to do X. Canva is $14.99 a month. You telling me you can't find somebody in your church that can go on Canva and start figuring out how to do some Canva templates? Nobody, this iPhone, which can do whole photo shoots on this phone if we take enough time to not think the answer is, in order to get a good photo, the real answer is I got to go find $14,000 for a camera. This phone can get anything done that you need to get done if you take the time to figure out how to do it, as opposed to just thinking the answer is I got to throw money at something and then change it. Nah, I have something. What do you have in your hands? What have you exhausted what you do with what you have in your hands before you start running to throw money at something? That'd probably be my thought.
You're a teacher
Yeah.
at Ascension High School. Yeah. You teach performing arts.
Yes.
I was part of a video project that we came to your school. Yeah. We got to film you and the students in that classroom. And there was so much excitement and so much energy in that room coming from you. Yeah. But the students were responding in such a way that they were having the time of their life. Why do you want to be a teacher, and why does that matter so much to, even though there's only a handful of students, there's not 40, 50, 100 students in that classroom. There was 4. Mm-hmm. How much do you matter to them, and how much do they matter to you?
Oh, they matter a lot to me. For this reason, I feel like when we are young and when we are little, we are very free. We wear our emotions on our shoulders. We laugh, we cry. We want something, we cry. We get mad, we get angry. We express ourselves. If something is wrong, our natural inclination is to tell someone, to reach out, to ask for help, to utilize all of our emotionals. We have an emotional range. And as we progressively get older, we're told, be quiet, sit down, hush, don't be that loud, be quiet, you're too loud, behave like this, be quiet. And so we don't realize that as we grow older, so many of our youth become more and more constricted. It's like what I was saying at the beginning about being blessed that my parents didn't try to shug all of who I was. And don't get me wrong, we can teach decorum, we can teach timing and place, but we don't want to reduce our kids down into these robots of quiet behavioral children that have no emotions and just, I don't want to express themselves, because then you get, that's why you have anxious adults. That's why you have adults who can't be honest about what they're going through and can't ask for help. That's why you have adults that don't have emotional awareness and they're not able to say, hey, I'm having a bad day today, I need help. Or I'm having a bad day today, I might need to go for a walk, because they're so used to being told, you can't do this, you can't do that. So in my classroom, I tell them when they come through the door, I say, I don't care what those other teachers, like I love all the teachers, but out there in math and English and science class, that's where you have to sit. That's where you have to be quiet. That's where you have to pay attention in this way. You have to behave yourself in this way. You have to be in this way. That's your cookie cutter moment. You need to look like the other students and behave yourself. In this room, you can be any version of yourself that you want to be. You want to scream, we're going to scream. You want to roll on the floor, we're going to roll on the floor. You want to yell? Yeah. You feel like crying? We're going to cry in this room. Because I want you to know that it's okay to have some sort of emotional awareness so that you can then harness that emotion to do whatever you need to do in life. Because all emotion is, a lot of ways, is passion. We're passionate about things. I'm passionate about this, so that's why I'm angry. I wouldn't be angry if I didn't have a passion about it. Something about what I'm doing has my heart attached to it, which is why it has elicited an emotional response from me. If it didn't, I would have no emotional response. Say that makes me happy, that makes me angry, that makes me sad. We need to be aware of those emotions, and it's okay to take those emotions to God, to utilize them, to discuss them, to use them to reach out to the next person and say, I'm angry, you might be angry too. Let's work on this thing together. That all of that is natural, and I think that is why I love teaching in my regard, because I get the opportunity. I tell the other teachers, we joke in the teachers' lounge, they're talking about their students and all their other students, what they do. And I say, I could never do y'all job. God bless y'all. Y'all want to tell them be quiet all the time and do this math and do this English. I could never. I'm the exact opposite. I come to the room like, you feel like scream. Let's scream together. Let's do it. Or you feel like you having a bored day, you're tired. You tired? Go ahead. Okay. We're tired. I'm tired too. And then being able to acknowledge it and then push past it. Okay, you're tired. I'm tired too. We could be tired together, but we got to do this work. So let's do what we got to do. And so that is probably one of my greatest joys, allowing them to have that freedom.
Can we talk about the album?
Absolutely. So this has been a long time coming. I have been a worship and praise and worship leader for the majority of my life. Many years ago, I've been writing original material for some time in my life. And for the last 6 years, along with everything I was doing at Spirit of Faith from a creative director side, I was also the assistant director of the worship department when we started writing our own albums and came out with Faith City Music, which is on Instagram and Facebook and all that stuff. And so during the pandemic, we were doing like music videos every week and doing original songs and doing a bunch of different stuff. And so I spent so much of my life doing it for other people and training myself by doing it for other people that now it's reached a time where I'm like getting ready to put it out there for myself. And I'm so hyped. I'm also nervous, if I'm being honest, it's one of those do it afraid moments. It's like as much as I feel like God is in it, as much as people ask for albums and music all the time, any creative knows it doesn't matter if everybody in the world is like, you're great at it. In your mind, you're like, I gotta make it, it's gotta be perfect. I gotta make sure it's right. And so I'm in the process of working on that. We had an album benefit concert just so that people could sow money towards if they were interested in me having an album. And I do that because most creatives know it ain't cheap out here in the street to do it right and to do it well. And although God has blessed me, I was like, hey, if anybody wants to sow and be a part, and we had an amazing response to that. People absolutely wanted the music. And so we've just been in the process of working. In 2 weeks, I fly out to my studio with my producer, and we're going to start really locking in the music material in hopes that we'll have something out by end of this year, top of next year. So I'm excited, but it's been a process.
I saw a clip from that benefit concert of your wife.
Yes,
just being an absolute fangirl of you, just having the time of her life.
That's my girl. I love her. She is, as most people with wives, most people with wives know, this is, thank God for the push. When you got a good, godly wife who loves and got your back, it's just like you feel like you can do anything for a period because she's just like, if nobody else is gonna hype you, I'm gonna hype you. I'm gonna be dead there center, going off, going crazy, hype. So I thank God for her. I love her.
Is it as hard to make an album as I'm imagining it?
Yes. Only because quality. Well, let me reverse it a little bit. It's hard to make a really good album. A lot of people make albums, and there's nothing wrong with it. And don't get me wrong, even the albums that people make in their basement, people make great albums in their basement, all that. But it also depends on the style of album that you're making. So like when you do music, there's some people whose music is really a lot of sound. That's when you see those producers that are like hitting the mixing board and they're making sound work. And it's really just them and the sounds that they create. But then you have more my genre of music, which takes a full band. It takes musicians. It takes background singers. So that's a bit more of an extensive process to make sure that it's done well, that it's mixed well, that it's produced well, that it sonically sounds the way it needs to sound. So you got to get the right producer. And that's a little bit different for me. Some people can do it themselves. I'm not a producer yet. That's something I'm training myself to be. But I'm not like a mixing and mastering my own albums and making sure it blends right and it sounds right all together. Right now I'm doing a lot of the writing and singing. So it's important to get a team of people that believe in your vision that can help produce the sound. And that can be the difficult part. And that can also be the expensive part. And then that's just making the album. That's not even to discuss the marketing for the album, because anybody who's had to do any sort of real marketing costs. It costs money. So you wanted to keep your costs at a certain level with the making of the album so that you could pay for the marketing of the album and the pushing of the album in that regard. So,
well, we definitely wish you the best with the album. Thank you so much for spending the morning with me, talking through all these things. It's pretty amazing to see how much you're involved in the community with your leadership, with your passion, your excitement, all these things we've been talking about. So thank you for stopping by and talking with me.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored, for real. It's been a great time.